Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be making Serendipity. Serendipity is a character from a series of children's books that were written by Stephen Cosgrove and illustrated by the amazing Robin James. I always loved these books. I was obsessed with Serendipity when I was a kid and I always wanted one, so let's make one. I'm starting off with some thinner tin foil. For me it's easier to use for my armatures, and then I'm using some armature wire and wrapping it into that tin foil. Here I'm making the tail shape, and you just want the general shape of your figure. This is going to add strength and also help you use less clay. I'm also covering my armature in some Sculpty Ultralight, which is kind of like sculpting with a marshmallow. I learned this trick from Ace of Clay. And here it's looking more sea serpentish with a weird type of head. And I'm using the armature mesh to make the tail. This is going to add a lot of strength and help me with the shape, and I'm pushing the ultralight through it. And then I remember, oh yeah, use some Sculpey Bacon Bond to actually help it stick so you're not struggling so much. I figured it out eventually. And here it is, all nice and baked. Now for this sculpture, I'm going to be using Aves Fix-It Sculpt. It's a two-part epoxy clay that you mix together. You really want to mix it good until you get this nice, even light gray color. Now this stuff is way different than polymer clay, and I'm still getting used to using it. I really like its strength and it sands really nicely as well. I'm using a different approach with this clay. You can use water to help you smooth it out, and I'm doing more pushing and patting and pulling the clay into place and then smoothing it out with water. You can use tools with this clay as well. You just want to make sure that you wipe them off and clean them well, or the epoxy clay may dry onto them and that can cause some issues. I'm using some press and seal to stop it from sticking to the glass, and my daughter then helped me realize that the neck was way too long, so off with her head. I also remembered that you're supposed to let the clay sit for 5 minutes so it becomes less tacky before use. Rolling the clay into sheets can help you really get a nice layer of clay on your piece so that it's less bumpy and you know how much clay you have around the whole piece. So that's some of the methods that I'm using while I'm doing this. I'm also trying to get that signature little hump on her back with some cute little wrinkles because this is baby Serendipity. If you look up the logo, you'll see it in all of the Serendipity books. And she's just a chunky, adorable little sea serpent. Here you see me using a brush with a lot of water on it to smooth things out, and that works so well. I just keep looking at the figure and seeing where pieces need to be added. Now this has a certain work time. It says 4 to 5 hours. I noticed it was a lot shorter for me. So I'm working in sections and then just overlapping layers of clay, knowing that I'm going to be sanding everything later. I'm just adding in some rolled pieces of clay that are tapered at the end, and then smoothing them in and using my tools to work in those wrinkles so that they look natural. And then here I'm seeing I just need more clay, so that piece is cured, so I just add more over it and then blend it all together. Here I'm going to do the back of the fin. This was challenging. It is such a tight area. I finally got it done though, and then I started adding clay to the front. It's nice and supported, and now with this layer of clay, it's incredibly strong. I'm just going in with my details, and now we got a cute little tail. And now after it dried, I noticed we had a bump, but that's okay because we're going to be sanding this area flat so that when I add details, everything will look really nice. Here I'm just adding more clay, and this is going to give the tail some depth so it's not just one dimension and boring, and I'm using a silicone shaper tool which really helps. Now I added more clay than I was going to need for these little fin details, and then I kind of carved it out of the clay. Then I did a lot of smoothing, and we're going to do more smoothing when we sand it as well. And of course we need to add more of those little chonk wrinkles because she's a chunky little baby. And here I just add them in and smooth them on, and now we can move to those adorable little arms. Here I'm just adding on the little toes and blending everything in with this needle tool that I made. And I just like to work in sections, add clay when I need it, or take it away if I add too much. And of course, you know, we gotta add even more wrinkles, because she's a wrinkly little baby. And you can see once you start blending it in with the water, it blends in really nicely. Here I'm doing the second arm. This one came out a little too big, but I just sanded it down and it looked all right in the end. Sometimes it can be challenging taking a figure from a 2D drawing to a 3D creature. Sometimes you have to change some things to make it work. Here you can see I work in layers and just add the clay as I go, blending it into the older pieces, and then smoothing it with water. And then I realized she needed even more chonk, and more chonk, and even more chonk to get the right amount of chunkiness. And when I told you guys I struggled with armature, I wasn't lying. Here I am struggling with the head armature, so I said, screw it, I'm gonna do it without it. And of course, it did not work out. So here I am angling the glass eyes that I'm using the correct way. You really want to make sure the eyes are placed correctly or it's going to look creepy. I'm adding a soft little smile to her snoot, and she's looking pretty cute. Until I put her in the oven to speed up the curing process, which you can do, but it did make the clay droop and that was on me. So I had to use my Dremel and sand her face off, which took forever because this stuff is like working with stone, which is amazing. So here I redid the head, I got it looking really good, and I let it air dry. I did not put it in the oven. If I had a proper armature, putting it in the oven wouldn't have been a problem. This clay is heat safe and you can put it in the oven up to a certain amount and it can speed up the curing process. And I am an impatient human who only learns the hard way. Here I am just putting some strips of clay around the eyes. We want to give it some depth and dimension. And here the water in the brush really helps out with those details. And of course she needs little snoot holes. And here I want to give that head a little bit of that shape at the top, kind of like a little dinosaur. She's so cute. And here she is. And now we get to do the part I hate most, which is sanding. I like to start with a harsher grit, and then I work my way down to the finer grits as I go. And I mean, just sand her, and then sand her some more. And then I'm gonna sand her some more. Look, there's no shortcuts, you guys. A lot of people ask me how I get my work so smooth, and I hate to say it's sanding. Here I felt like a little archaeologist using my brush. Now, I'm going to recommend you guys try out sanding sponges. These are amazing for getting into all the little cracks and crevices. And here's where you can refine those details and really smooth them out and get them looking nice. I even used my Exacto to carve some areas, which worked out amazing. And then I always like to end with a wet sand. Here she is, all nice and smooth, looking very cute. Now to make her fin, I started out with individual little triangles of clay and stuck them all together. The hard part was blending them all together. So I would just move the clay around. Sometimes I needed to add clay in between where the two fins meet to get them all into one piece. And this took some time. It was a little tedious, but I worked in sections. And then I would use the water to smooth it out and then go in to do the detailing. Here I'm just adding some cute little lines on the fins and sharpening it up where it meets the body. And constantly looking at my photo for references. They help you so much. Here you can see I'm using my finger to support the fin so that it doesn't break off or bend. That'll give you some nice support that you can sculpt on. And then of course I finish off with my wet brush. I did the same thing for the tail, working from the opposite end. And you just want to make sure you start off with the smaller scales first and work your way up. Now after sanding the original body, it was a little more challenging to get the clay to stick to it for the fins. So you just want to make sure that if you've sanded a piece and are adding clay after, that you really make sure it's adhered well. This is me working 4 times the speed. And it's kind of like putting together a little dinosaur. She's definitely got the dinosaur vibes, adding the little spikes and then smoothing them out. Just add clay where you need to and smooth them together. And adding the details makes all the difference, especially for these fins. After I smooth them out with some wet brushing, I move on to sanding. You always want to make sure that you're using proper safety gear so that none of this dust ends up in your lungs. Here I had to get a little creative when it comes to sanding with some tweezers and sandpaper. And of course I end with a wet sand. Now here I use a little method where I use a stick and some hot glue to make a support so that I can airbrush them. Basically I'm making her into a giant lollipop so she's easier to airbrush. Should I have made this for a sculpture this big and heavy? No. Did she fall off? Yes. But somehow she magically landed on her feet and didn't damage the paint job. But beware if you are doing this with a sculpture this heavy and big. Here I'm just laying down the base coat, which is kind of boring, so I skipped over it. Now we're getting to the fun part, which is adding the colors. I'm going to be using 2 colors for the fins and 2 colors for the body as well. You always want to make sure you're using more than one color, it just adds so much more depth. Now I don't usually use white base coats on my sculptures, and I'm still not sure if I love it or not, but I think I'll experiment with it more. And here you can see why adding that second color is so important. It just gives it so much more interest and depth. And when they say that paint prep takes the longest, they're right. I have not had success with taping things off with airbrushing until this very moment. And I realized that I was not letting the paint dry enough before adding the tape. This is a gentle type of painter's tape, and other than taking forever to apply, it really did its job, and I'll definitely be using it more in the future. And here you can see once you add that second color, it just looks so much better. I never get sick of watching this. I love airbrushing. Now some tips for airbrushing is to take your time, slow and steady, and multiple light coats. Here I'm highlighting all those adorable wrinkles she has, and there's a little heart shape on her chest as well. Now for my secret ingredient. It's glitter. It's always glitter. I thinned down the Dragonfly glaze with some water so I could run it through my airbrush, and as you can see, she is a sparkly little diamond. And who doesn't love some tape reveals? I saved all the good ones for you guys. Now I get to add in all those little details that I didn't get with the airbrush. The same goes when you're painting by hand. Thin coats, multiple coats, nice and smooth. If your paint's too chunky, you want to water it down. Here I get to highlight all those cute little wrinkles. And here you can see she actually has some nice little spots on her back. So we want to make sure we add those as well. And this book is just so sweet and precious. In the beginning, Serendipity doesn't know who she is or what she's supposed to do, and then she ends up finding her purpose and becoming a guardian of all the seas and protecting her friends in the ocean. And I just remember being so in love with the illustrations. They were just amazing and so sweet. Now drawing the pupils on with pencil really helped me figure out how I wanted these to look. They were looking a little wonky before, and it's much easier to erase pencil than it is to erase paint, so I suggest doing that before you start painting. The eyes are one of the most important aspects of any sculpture, so you really want to make sure you get it right. And here you can see she's got those nice little pupils, and we can do the outer ring of the iris. I'm going to be using 2 colors for this, and I'm trying to wet blend them, and that's where you're using wet paint to help you mix and blend the colors together. I'm still learning this technique, and I'm definitely going to practice it more. Here I'm using darker colors toward the outside, and then the middle part I'm adding the lighter color. Here you can see adding the black ring around the eye really makes her look like Serendipity, along with adding the black around the iris, and of course you need those white highlights. I realized I'd almost forgot to paint the fin detail, so I went ahead with a darker green and painted those in. Now once all the paint is done, I'm going to use this Krylon matte finish all over her. And that brings down the sparkle just a bit, and it gives her a nice velvet finish, and she's ready for her felt pads on the bottom. My friend Poppy Roots Cottage told me about this. It is a self-adhesive gray velvet shelf liner paper, and it is great for adding to the bottom of sculptures. Make sure you check her out. She makes some amazing dragon sculptures. Here you can see I just made a template for the bottom of my sculpture, and then they just stick right into place. They're very easy to use. Now this will protect your piece, and it also just gives it a very nice finished professional look. And if you mess up, don't worry, just peel it back up carefully and put it in the right position. Serendipity has gorgeous long eyelashes, so of course I had to add those. I went and asked my friend Lish Cook Art how she did her gorgeous eyelashes on her pieces, and she gave me some great tips on what glue to use, which was super glue, and how to apply it, and it's kind of like how people do, except for we don't use super glue. I decided to paint the band to help it blend in with her eyeliner, and I glued it down in sections and really took my time. And of course then I realized I forgot to gloss her eyes. I hope you guys had fun taking a little walk down memory lane and bringing one of my favorite childhood characters to life. I'll put a link to all my friends who helped me with this video in the description. And make sure to hit subscribe if you'd like to see more art videos.